can smell the shit from 5 miles away.
Thank you for tuning in, where we are going to look at some economic lessons from Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. My name is Matt Rosu. I am an economist at Susquehanna University, joined for another video with Dan Bragen, who is a PhD student at Clemson University. Dan, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me. I got to get used to introducing myself as a PhD candidate now.
I know. It's not a bad way to go. Dan's recent graduate from Susquehanna and about to start the PhD journey. So congratulations and condolences probably at the same time.
Thank you.
Everybody who's gone through it will agree. But during House of the Dragon Season 2, dropping videos each week looking at economic lessons of either Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. And this video has video clips from both. So going to look at a little bit of economic history and start with a clip that's a hybrid, a clip from first House of the Dragon, which I know comes later is when we're seeing it, but it's earlier in time since it's the prequel, and then from Game of Thrones. We're going to go to those clips right now.
You can smell the shit from 5 miles away. Well, why have we stopped? Go on!
Okay, two separate clips, 300 years apart. We pretty much see, though, the same city. And it's striking that it looks almost the same. And we get the great comment that it does not smell very good in the more recent times. And this is a bit interesting, right? So clearly there has not been significant economic growth. And that's the first thing that jumps out to me in watching those two. Dan, what I don't know if that's the first thing that jumps out or if something else jumps out at you when you watch those two clips.
Yeah, that's definitely the first thing. It's basically the same height. The city's just as tall. The city's just as wide. You don't get an idea of how many people are living there or anything, or how they're living even. But you definitely get the idea that over this 200, 300-year period, existence is pretty much the same for the average person.
Yeah.
Which definitely gets into why we recorded this clip, sort of the Malthusian trap.
Yeah, so Malthus kind of famously thought that the population was going to starve because the rate of growth of the population would exceed the rate that food could grow. Thankfully, technology for food, at least in developed countries, has grown at a much more exponential rate than population has grown. So we haven't seen that. But the general idea, my general thought on this is, right, if population grows too fast, there will be all sorts of adverse side effects. And the number one being people simply can't feed themselves. That's my general take on Malthus's argument. I don't know if you have another idea of the Malthusian trap.
I feel like whenever I learn about Malthus, he's always implicitly described as the most wrong guy of all time. Because at the time that he was writing, or at least, maybe a few decades prior, he was 100% right. That is how human experience was. But as he was writing, the technological forces and advances, and, you could argue the strength of property rights and other institutions that were largely pro-market, we're actually producing continuous economic growth, and that these standards of living would continue to expand and get better. But Malthus, for the most part, was right for the majority of human civilization and human experience. The lifestyle of someone in ancient Rome was roughly the same as a lifestyle in someone who was watching a Shakespeare play in the 1600s. And I think that's, I guess, not foresight, backward sight is really impressive for him to be able to kind of discover that economic fact of that time period, but also rather funny that it did unfoil itself.
Thankfully, yeah. I mean, he's not been correct anymore, based on the growth, the economic growth, the increases in production that we've seen in agriculture and manufacturing, production, the sciences, all of those areas. But a huge contrast, right? If you saw the flyovers, they both look like beautiful areas to live. The image on the screen is Shanghai 1990 to 2010, and it is absolutely stunning, the difference that you see there. Now, this is the extreme example of growth, but there are many places where if you take a 50-year snapshot then versus now, they won't look anything like, they just won't look the same at all because of the economic growth. Whereas here, it really does look almost identical. The next video I think that we'll watch helps to get us into some of the explanations for why we've seen growth in our world and not necessarily seeing growth in the world of Westeros over those couple of 100 years. So let's get to the next clip.
Not protecting anyone. I just wonder if it's not wiser to wait. Why risk going against the North if they would be our allies? Rise up against them and they could destroy us. But if we pledge fealty to them, they'll give us Casterly Rock.
What are our words? Our words.
We do not sow.
We do not sow. We are ironborn. We're not subjects. We're not slaves. We do not plough the fields or toil in the mine. We take what is ours. Your time with the wolves has made you weak.
Love that clip and the discussion in there, and in have a previous video where we discussed this as well. But in terms of the mindset and what you would need for economic growth, you do need a population that more or less has a rule of law that will think, okay, in order to gain, let's try to provide something of value to somebody else, and they will gain, we will gain, and we can specialize in what we're good at. All sorts of good consequences can come from that. The father and the son have very different views here on what's right. So how do you think the views here kind of tied into the economic growth or lack of it in Westeros?
I guess a great side question always the Malthusian trap is, why did society persist for as long as it did like that? If it's, simply if you're allowing people to invest, to develop their businesses, to allow them to reap the rewards of their investments, then you'll see a more economic growth. That seems so simple to us now, but why didn't they think of that beforehand? Why weren't they doing that? And it seems to be the answer is largely the political institutions that existed. They were very extractive. If you think of the colonial system, even just purely taking natural resources from a country, if there's no, confirmation to you as a person that your property won't just be taken for the king or queen or the aristocracy, then what's the point in investing and trying to build for the future? Well, now, if you have a political system that is constrained in some manner, if you think of the sort of constraints put on the British Crown in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, it did create the environment for people to feel comfortable in their property, to invest in the future. And maybe that's a big reason as to why we saw the Industrial Revolution and such spectacular growth coming out of Great Britain at that time.
Yeah, the idea of respect for law, respect for trade, respect for property rights, those are basically prerequisites. Yeah, if you don't believe that if you work hard and earn, you work hard in your field and you grow more, if you think it will simply be taken from you, that would remove any incentive for you to do that.
Now, I guess I feel like I may not have not directly addressed your question, but in Westeros, why isn't there growth? Maybe why isn't their political system like that? Is their political system conducive to growth? And I think in the first episode of the newest season of House of the Dragons, the king of the king sitting in King's Landing at the time, you could have arguments of whether he's a real ruler or not. He's basically confiscating all of the goats and all of the cattle from the surrounding lands to feed his army so that he can wage a war. Property rights aren't respected in Westeros, certainly not by the You see the Lannisters and other people spoiling, taking from others. In the first season of Game of Thrones, the king just hunts and eats and drinks. He spends all the time. They're massive debt, clearly
Yep.
stealing from the population to support their lavish lifestyles. And that's probably largely the reason why they aren't a successful economy, why
Yeah.
King's Landing looks so similar after 300 years. Nothing's being done to actually invest in the future.
No, and they're not. Never do you hear the king discuss what can we do to make sure all our citizens are better off, right? That's
Yeah.
not something that's ever. How can we ensure there are good property rights, and how can we increase gains from trade? Those are never discussed. So, putting up a couple different graphs on the screen here, world GDP over the last 2 millennia. And then you mentioned how Malthus basically was right when he was discussing, in the sense that increases in what was produced in the world had not really gone up. And if population grows up or population increases without a corresponding increase in production, everybody indeed will starve. What ended up happening is that around the same time he was saying that, it's what Deirdre McCloskey calls the bourgeois revolution. I always think, the bourgeois trilogy of books, the argument that she makes is there was a real change in the way people valued trade, valued production, valued property rights, that allowed us to essentially unleash all of the benefits of human productivity that had not been released to this point in time. So there's up until, right, if you look up until 1800 or so, it had gone up a bit, but it's not that much different than 2,000 years before. When now, I mean, we see it's a hockey stick graph, right? I mean, incomes have gone up dramatically. The other graph that's very much related to this is the share of the world living in extreme poverty, right? And this one starts at 1820. And at that time, right, there's about 1 billion people. Malthus is saying, look, if we keep growing, it's going to lead to everybody starving. At that point in time, most people were in extreme poverty, but slowly but surely, the number of people who weren't in extreme poverty starts to increase, and the number eventually, even as the population is growing, the number living in extreme poverty is dropping. And this correlates pretty heavily with the economic freedom that you see. And if you look country by country, there's some analysis that would look at the countries that are more free have experienced a little bit, more of the economic growth. Those that are less free have experienced less of it, unfortunately. So there's still room for improvements. But yeah, Westeros is kind of stuck in that pre-1800 mindset of our own world. And it's absolutely fascinating. I don't think the creators intended to capture this, but I think they did a nice job of capturing what the world was like for, centuries or millennia prior to the bourgeois revolution.
And I think another great thing that clip captures is sort of the moral perspectives maybe of people in older times prior to the Industrial Revolution and greater growth and more, open markets. What capitalism does so great, what markets do so great, is that it kind of tricks your self-interest into being cooperative with other people. You can always throw in an Adam Smith quote somewhere. It's not for the benevolence of the butcher, but it's what I should learn the quote just because I use it so often.
Yeah.
But the way the market almost tricks you into acting in your self-interest on behalf of your fellow man and stealing and robbing others, like Theon's dad is suggesting that's their creed. We go out there, we steal, we take from others. We're not farmers, we're not traders.
Yeah.
That sort of perspective is very one-sided, and that he could perhaps feed his self-interest even more if he were to be cooperative. And the ability of the market to sort of trick ourselves into doing that explain some of that growth as well.
Yeah, it's fantastic that it is in our best interest to create something of value for others. And Art Carden, who came to Susquehanna's campus in October and co-wrote a book, Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich, with Deirdre McCloskey, that he kind of viewed as, how do we take this 2,000 pages that she wrote and kind of make it a little bit more accessible for, lay people. And he put an insight on it that I hadn't heard before, in that the other nice part about what Adam Smith is saying is that there's a value to what you're producing, and knowing if somebody's doing trade with you, they're not doing it to do you a favor. You should be able to hold your head up high and say, wow, I'm producing something of value that they want from me. They're not making this trade because they're just being nice to me. They have pity on me. They're making this trade because they see what I'm doing has value, and I see what they're doing has value. And it's really kind of an uplifting message in that regard, that with trade, a lot of dignity, like, each individual's work, they can realize, yeah, they can be proud of that, and have dignity that their work is adding value to society.
Agreed.
Well, any Malthus and economic growth, I mean, we could go on for a long time. Any last thoughts on the clips that we saw? Anything else with economic growth, Game of Thrones?
I don't think so. I mean, it'd be interesting to see George R. R. Martin's the author of the books. I think that's his name. I don't want to butcher it,
Yep.
but it'd be interesting to see like what sort of world he envisions from the events of Game of Thrones. If they ever do escape that Malthusian trap, it would be interesting to see what sort of characters and what decisions lead to that more positive world versus other characters and their actions who lead to more poverty and squalor, essentially.
He's got to get this next book finished for us.
Yeah. I just need to suggest that. He needs to finish those books first.
Yeah, I think it's been a while, but
Yeah.
thank you. I really appreciate everybody who tuned in. If you know of other examples in the series where you think highlights economic growth or the lack of it, please go ahead and leave a comment. But we will be dropping more videos on economic lessons of Game of Thrones every week. So please like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video.